C-SPAN 2. For specific times, consult our website at booktv.org.
Now, a discussion on democracy in the Middle East and perceptions of the United States in the Muslim world. This is from the annual convention of the Muslim Public Affairs Council held last weekend in Los Angeles. It's an hour, 15 minutes.
Erosions to American democracy, how are those two things related? Well, if you think about hate as a kind of catchphrase that encompasses ignorance, job discrimination, legitimate fears of Americans since September 11th, the need for security, that whole, I mean, perhaps hate is a little bit of the wrong word, but that entire nexus of concerns, fears, lack of information that we've been faced with since September 11th is what we are calling what unfortunately turns to hate. Now, how does that threaten our way of life here in America? How does that threaten American democracy? We have 4 fascinating perspectives on that question here today. The first speaker is going to be Dr. Mohammad Baqir Bazai, who is the gentleman right here. He has attended various theological and Islamic seminaries in Iran since childhood and graduated from the National University of Iran in the field of political and social science with an emphasis in Islamic studies in 1978. Dr. Bazai obtained his Doctor of Philosophy and Political Science from the University of California at Santa Barbara in 1991 in conjunction with UC Berkeley, with strong emphasis on the religious studies and Islamic theology, history, and civilization. He's going to talk today about a sort of comparative perspective between how Islam conceives human rights and the kind of theory and history of human rights in Islam, and compare that with the Western development of understanding of human rights via such institutions as the UN, such documents as the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and how it is that there is a relationship, why it is that those who come from Islamic backgrounds relate very, very deeply, both textually and experientially, with the Western understanding of human rights. He's also going to be talking a bit about Ms. Sireen Abadi, who we very much congratulate, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize. MPAC congratulates her and sent out a statement, and we're very, very happy about that. So he's going to start us off with that philosophical perspective. Then we are going to turn to Ms. Sireen Sawaf, who really is a powerhouse. She's on the front lines of grassroots organizing around issues of discrimination and hate crimes. She is the Hate Crimes Prevention Coordinator at the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and she has spoken to high school students all over California. She's the lead spearhead of the hate crimes department that we have here at MPAC. And she is a graduate of the California Polytechnic Institution of Pomona, and she majored in political science. She's worked with the Minaret magazine. And what's interesting about Sireen's work is that very quickly, when you're trying to deal with hate crimes, when you get these individual calls from people who have experienced a hate incident or a hate crime, you realize that there's no way that your work can stop there. You have to deal with a type of legislation that is coming about that creates the environment for these hate crimes to occur. So therefore, Sireen is also very involved in dealing with local resolutions, in really working hard on coalitions to defeat the parts of the Patriot Act that we have a serious problem with. She's done excellent work on the Clear Act. And so she's going to kind of talk about the relationship between trying to do this on-the-ground human rights work and also dealing with the legislation that sometimes makes these human rights abuses possible. The next speaker we're going to have is going to be Ben Weiser, who's a staff attorney with the ACLU here in Southern California. He is an excellent spokesperson and very knowledgeable on constitutional law and issues having to do with our civil rights. And he's going to share with us the very good news that the Second Circuit has recently ruled that President Bush broke the law in detaining Jose Padilla without charges, and he now has 30 days to release Jose Padilla or charge him with a crime. On the same day, the Ninth Circuit of California ruled that the detainees in Guantanamo Bay have access to the federal courts here in the United States to challenge their detentions. These two rulings are an absolute, just excellent for American democracy. We're very, very thrilled that the appeals courts have made these decisions. Of course, they're all subject to the Supreme Court, but Ben's going to be able to talk about those cases and the implications in the struggle to maintain our way of life and democracy here in America. And our last speaker, and last but certainly not least, is the Reverend George Regas, who's furthest to my left. He is a community leader. He spent 29 years on the job as the rector of All Saints Church in Pasadena, a bellwether of open, progressive Christian thought here in Southern California. He's the executive director of the Regas Institute, which is dedicated to the study and examination of progressive religion as a counterbalance to the religious right. And Reverend Regas is going to be able to talk about not only his extensive human rights and community work here, he's also very involved with the Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace, which is a coalition of religious leaders that came together against the war. But he's also going to talk about the ways that an exclusivist, sort of narrow, rigid view of religion, in this case within the Christian community, but also within other communities, is really a major, major problem and a major way of increasing hate in our society. So as you can see, we have a very in-depth panel with fascinating speakers, and I will speak no more and turn it over to Dr. Bazai.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to express my, I think this one is, thank you very much. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستمد ونستعين. In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation and thanks to the MPAC on behalf of Iman Foundation that I'm frequent speakers there, as well as myself that, of course, I apologize for changing the time and the schedule of my speech. It was supposed to be yesterday, which was more appropriate in the context of human rights in Islam. Nonetheless, it's not irrelevant, and of course, because of the issue of human rights so significant to the issues of justice, democracy, and human rights overall, globally and nationally, so we could relate to the panel as well today. Let me begin my brief speech here with the ayah of Quran from Surah Al-Hujr. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ فَحَمَلَهَا فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. And many other ayats that I don't want to start and bore you with at this point. Of course, I know this is a significant and important statements from our book, Holy Book, the book of guidance, the book of commitment, understanding, and hidayah, guidance for everybody. And so, as a fundamental principle and one of the basic or the basis of Islamic ideology, which is the Holy Quran, I would take most of the issues of human rights from that perspective, of a Quranic perspective, as one of the four major principles or the four major foundation of ideological analysis of issues of human rights. Quran, Sunnah, the traditions, the acts and beliefs and sayings of the Prophet and other, of course, leaders and the saints of Islam, as well as aql, reason and wisdom, and the fourth, Shia and Ijma, the consultations among the people of wisdom and understanding and experts, which we call them Ahlul Halla wal Aqd, the people who are, of course, experts in Islamic jurisprudence. So based on these four principles of Quran, Sunnah, Aql, and Ijma, our issues of human rights are based. With all due respect to many of those people who think that the ideas of human rights is something new or unique to these fashionable or fads which is going on in the United States or throughout the Western world. It has been issues of Islam for centuries and centuries. It is not new nor unique to our Islamic faith and ideologies. And from the part of the world of Islamic world of Iran that I am, it's a main part of Islamic mysticism and poetry and philosophy as well. From Rumi to Sadi to Hafiz to many of the great philosophers and poet philosophers and thinkers of our Islamic world. Let me start briefly by explaining here that what are the major themes of human rights. Of course, when Sarah told me that I have only 10 or 15 minutes, and as an academic and a political scientist, social scientist, you see, this is I think a fatal event for me, because we as a tradition have minimum speech of 1 hour or more speech time. But when you put in the 10 minutes, it's like you restrict me in a cage in the prison that I cannot express myself what I'm going to say. So I'm going to be very brief. I had prepared more than probably 2 hours of speech to put it in. It's just the context of 15 minutes or 10 minutes. It's not possible, but we're trying and attempt to do the best as we could. In Islamic view, the human rights are based on 5 necessities. As in Islamic old jurisprudence, which some people try, some of my colleagues, unfortunately, try to divide them in the classical or medieval philosophy of Islamic human rights vis-a-vis the modern Islamic human rights. I would not like to make these artificial divisions. Human rights is human rights, whether modern or traditional, whether old or new, young or old, or for anybody, human rights is human rights and has always been respected, whether traditionally or in modern views, or whether in medieval or pre-medieval or Renaissance. We do not limit them to certain time of limits of history. It is something global, it's something universal, it's something eternal. Therefore, when we are talking about human rights, we are talking about 5 major necessities, as in original Arabic terminology, which, by the way, forgive me if I'm going to jump from English to Arabic, or sometime maybe even to Persian poetry, so it's going to be trilingual speech very briefly. So in this case, human rights is daruriyatul khamsah, as we say it in Arabic. 5 necessities. Hifzuddin, the preservation of religion, is one major part of these human rights. The preservation and protection and maintenance and promotion of what we call faith, religion, ideology, as a guidance for all of us. So human rights becomes human duties. It's not just rights. In Islam, the idea of human rights is human duties. It's part of the principle of enjoining good and forbidding evil. Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. It's part of that main principles which force and obligates everybody in human and Islamic community to not only maintain those rights, but consider them as their own duties and obligations to enforce them. It becomes an obligation for every Muslim among the Muslim societies or beyond to fulfill those human rights issues. Therefore, when we have this very interesting expression by Prophet Muhammad that says, "Man asbaha wa lam yahtamma bi umur al-muslimin falaysa bimuslim." If a Muslim lives or passes nights and days and lives his living without paying attention and sympathize and empathize with the rest of Islamic community and beyond, is not a Muslim. That become a duty for every member of the Islamic community to fulfill those rights of consultation, of cooperation, of understanding the other problems of the members of the society. Here what we have is a question of preservation of religion for what? As a guidance. As a guidance. We need guidance. That book of guidance, which is Quran, which is the holy book, La rayba fi, there is no doubt in it. Hudan lil muttaqin, the guidance for the people who believes in it, and beyond, those people who want to be virtue and to be virtuous and follow the right path and straight path. Therefore, the preservation, hifzuddin, the preservation of religion. The second of part of these human rights, which becomes human duty, is hifdun nafs, the protection and preservation of one's individual self. Here is the core ideas of Universal Declaration of Human Rights when it's talking about human integrity at the time of birth. He is born free, yes. Human being is born free. To be integral to himself, as part of his integrity, to respect his own honor and the others. But is this part of this freedom to do anything we want or everything we want? To destroy the others? To kill others, innocent or non-innocent? Quran clearly has a very strict opinion and very clear opinion on that, which, thanks God, has made it clear that contrary to what's happening in the Western world, as view Islam as a barbarian, unfortunately, accusatory statements, Many of them obviously in the medias and publications consider us to be barbarian, terrorists, violent, so on and so forth. Not familiar with any form of civilization. You're hearing every day what Quran says, Man qatala nafsan bighayri nafs. If somebody, no matter what, kills somebody innocent, it doesn't matter what. فَكَأَنَّمَا قَتَلَ النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. It is an equivalent to killing of the whole generations of the people of the Nas, like just a genocide, just a genocidal act. So this question is in front of us, that Islam not only rejects the idea of violence, innocent killing, people who act any sort of barbaric act contrary to what the Western societies want us to believe, but it is established on the basis of justice, equality, virtue, all the good things and goodness for humanity, all good things that we call ma'ruf. And comes to the second part of hifdun nafs, the preservation of oneself, not only just in the material and obvious condition of what we objectively see, but also in moral and ethical conditions as well. The integrity of oneself, the honor of oneself. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We respect this human being. We have created them with honor, with dignity. And this is where the first declaration of Universal Declaration of Human Rights is about. Human being is born free with that honor, with that integrity. But he is free to be free from whims, free to be free from injustice, free to be free from all kind of bad and evil acts. That's the freedom means in Islam, as a means, as a tools to accomplish what you are beyond. Rumi says it very clearly. Rumi, Maulana Jalal-ad-Din Rumi says it very clearly. هر آن چیزی که تو گویی که آنی به بالاتر نگر، بالاتر آنی. Whatever you see you are, is not you. You have to fly beyond that and soar beyond all these elements of material, objective conditions. Break that and go beyond. Saadi says it very clearly. Saadi's statements are inscribed in the Human Rights Declarations of United Nations. Where is it? بنی آدم اعضای یکدیگرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند. The sons of Bani Adam, all human individuals, are part of one individual body. When there is elements of disaster, suffering, destruction of one part of this body, all humanity is under suffering and under problem. This is part of the things that's happening here. Therefore, human rights is something that is not new, not unique, and not unique. It is something that says in Quran, in all the historical philosophies that we have, in Islamic philosophy. And the third, let me briefly here, the other three principles of human rights after these two. Preservation of religion, preservation of oneself, then preservation of family. Hifzun nasl, family, procreations, relationship among the members of the family. This is something also enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights when it is talking several articles about all the relationship, the welfare of the family, economic and social welfare of the family. Islam talks about that. Al-Mawardi, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Khaldun. I'm naming just because I don't have time to go through their statements. Many of these philosophers and thinkers of Islamic philosophy, plus, as I said, some of the mystic philosophies, plus Allame Naini of Iran, who wrote the first treatise 100 years ago about constitutionalism and freedom and equality in Iran, which became the backbone of constitutional revolution of Iran of 1906, and later on become the backbone of many other revolutionary activities. He wrote his treaty, At-Tanbih al-Ummah wa Tanzih al-Millah, awareness to the nation, and therefore cleaning and cleansing the society's thought and understanding. After that came human rights and ideas, one after the others, to become clear. It is not just 50 years ago that Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written. It was many, many years before that, and we have to be proud of it. Of course, there are other two principles of the preservation of the rights. One is the wealth, Hifzul Mal, which becomes very important, economic aspects of human rights. To conclude briefly, all what we have in human rights, Islamic human rights, there is no contradiction. As the chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee said it barefaced, very clear to Ms. Sireen Ebadi in Oslo. He put it very clearly. We have elected this woman to be proud of the Islamic nations completely, because this woman and many other Islamic women truly do not see any contradictions between Islamic perspectives of human rights and any sort of human rights whatsoever, regardless what is traditional or modern or anything. There is no contradictions between what we view as Islam and human rights and what we view in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There is some differences, of course, we accept that. But the principles of Qur'an's aql, reason and wisdom, and of course sunnah, and of course ijma and consultations, all should be the basis of these human rights. We cannot do whatever we want just because we are free. Freedom and responsibility. This is what amana. Inna aradna al-amanata ala samawati wal-arzi wal-jibal. We descended this amana, this trust upon everybody to maintain that, to fulfill that, and to act upon that. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Sireen Sawaf.
Assalamu alaikum. Some say that the escalation of terrorism and colorful alerts, the hunt for dictators, and the capture of potential threats to national security, the Muslim community should willingly sacrifice those liberties and they have enjoyed in this country for decades and build a certain tolerance for mild forms of discrimination and backlash. Rather than cry wolf at the physical and psychological attacks on the small percentage of innocent civilians perceived to be of similar ethnic, religious, and national background as the hijackers of 9/11, Muslims should wave their flags around in utter glee, unconditionally support our administration, and silently console victims of hate. Our attention should be solely focused on condemning dictators in the Muslim world. And our efforts should be directed towards fighting extremists within our community alone. Alone. For we are being carved out of the broader American community. Standards of bias and mild forms of discrimination are being used to measure us. But we refuse to cower to such prejudice and hate, be it de facto or de jure, in any fashion. Hate and the attempts to destroy American democracy, freedom, the essence of American democracy, must be explored threefold. First, we must measure the prevalence of hate and reevaluate statistics. Second, we have to attempt to grasp the psychology of hate and its root. And third, we should try to identify the various forms of hate. In efforts to look at the statistics and measure this, we should look at national and local, local primarily being Los Angeles. The FBI statistics, their hate crime statistics, indicate that there was a 1,600% spike in hate crimes following 9/11. And in 2002, well, merely 170 individuals have suffered of anti-Islamic bias, making up a shy 2% of the total hate crimes. Now, the total reported hate crimes have declined from 9,700 to 7,500 from 2001 to 2002. Now, on the local scene, we see Los Angeles reporting that hate crimes against Muslims and Middle Easterners have, unrelated to 9/11, have dropped from 18 to 22 crimes. So a total of 8% of the complete religious crimes against religious identification. In crimes related to 9/11, see they've been sectioned off, broken off into two categories. Crimes targeting Muslims have dropped from 188 to 17. Yet those in schools have increased by 4%, from 8 to 12%. What do these statistics mean? Well, first and foremost, statistics do serve a purpose, and in that they provide a bird's eye view into what's taking place on the ground. But we must not fool ourselves into thinking that this is giving us a view of the reality. They have two main fallacies. One, we're basing it off of reported hate crimes, right? Many studies show that communities, especially the immigrant community, has a disconnect with reporting to law enforcement. And if we look into the Muslim community specifically, we find the apathy of reporting. Why report? You know, what's law enforcement going to do? Really, it's between God. God is going to be my soul helper, right? My soul savior. That's important, but the lack of reporting is what we're trying to identify. I had a Bangladeshi case, a man that was from Bangladesh, a taxi driver. He was chased for 2 blocks. He was verbally insulted. Profanity was used against him. He was about to be physically attacked. Everything from go back to your home, you effing Mohammad, you effing Arab. The man got out of his car, was about to attack him. He was saved by a green light, and he took off. He had the license plate of this individual, yet he failed to follow through with reporting. He failed to follow through because that is the psychology of the community we're dealing with. And the second fallacy of these statistics is that not every crime that meets a certain threshold will be categorized as a hate crime. If that element of hate has not been established beyond all reasonable doubt, then it is dismissed as another crime. Why are we crying about this? Are we crying, actually? The problem with hate crimes that makes it such a big deal is that hate crimes have a residual effect on the community. It's sending a message. They're message crimes saying that this community does not belong in American society. This community is to be marginalized. This community is unaccepted, and they are not going to enjoy the same rights as the rest of us. So let's go beyond the statistics and look at the psychology of hate. Where does this come from? Well, we look into the school systems, our institutions. We can look at media. We can look into society, or we can look into individual homes. And to blame one without the other, I think, would be not addressing the complete picture. Everything plays a part into developing a psychology of superiority. We see it in school books, we see it in the American history books, where Columbus discovered a new world and he came to an unsavaged people and civilized them, where this manifest destiny, this concept of manifest destiny, it was God-given, right, that this was to become the America. We find institutionalized hate within textbooks. We see it in media, these images, these constant images of violent people. We see these movies depicting Muslims as intolerant, not without my daughter, right? We see oppressive men stripping women from their rights. We see cases in Saudi Arabia and the Taliban where women are not allowed to drive, where women are supposed to cover from head to toe, where they have no right that is actually given to them through the Quran. That aside, we see violence, images of violence. We see little kids throwing stones and just angry, yet we fail to see the other picture, the other side where the Israeli tank can be lying. We see dirty-looking Muslim people. And this goes to dehumanize a community. And unfortunately, the institution that we have in our school systems is the lack of understanding of the Muslim community. Sure, given that our American history books have expanded their chapters to cover Islam for over two plus chapters in 7th grade, and a good segment of Islam is covered in 10th grade, that given, unfortunately, teachers are not providing that connection between what is happening in reality and what the textbooks say. I go out to different schools and I talk about Islam, and I make it a point to address stereotypes because I don't believe in censorship when it comes to education. And I've received questions like, which passages do Muslims use, do terrorists use to justify terrorism? And why are Muslim women forced to cover their hair? And what's wrong with Muslim people? Why are they so angry? These are high school kids that are asking me these questions. And I brought a few letters to just identify their concerns. One kid said, now I don't see after talking about Islam and explaining the concept of polygamy and how it fell into a certain context at that time, a kid says, well, now I don't see it as something that is incredibly bad and dirty. We were bad and dirty before. Another kid wrote, I learned that in Islam, you're not allowed to hate other people. The Quran tells you, don't hate other people, implying, oh, wait, it does say don't hate other people? I was written, I didn't know before, like Arabs and Sikhs were getting assaulted because they looked like they carried out the terrorist plots. Also, I didn't know that Islam teaches no hate. This image that has been reinforced into the minds of these kids is that these people, this community, is one of hate, intolerance, oppression, unacceptance, right, and compulsion. You have no right to pick and choose how you conduct yourself. You have no right to follow the beliefs that you believe in, right? You have to abide by the authorities, when Islam says the exact opposite. So we can look at society, we can look at the homes of individuals, and one girl wrote to me, unfortunately, and very sad to say, but Islam is not acceptable by my parents, so I never heard any good about it. Because of my parents' limits, I was left with the television to further educate me on Islam. I heard nothing but negativity. The main thing being Muslims are violent. All terrorists aren't Muslims. I didn't know that. Also, the acts of Osama bin Laden weren't on behalf of Muslim people. The most interesting thing I learned was that Muslims are not violent. Again, this simply goes to say that these images have been ingrained into the minds of the next generation. So in that sense, it's a little alarming, and we have to take some sort of responsibility. What do? Do we educate these schools? Do we try to focus our attention on media? Do we try to place the proper image into the minds of the American public? Well, in order to combat being dehumanized, we must humanize ourselves. That is the only way. If we fail to humanize ourselves in our daily lives, interact with the American public, because we are American, we are human, we are of this country, then we're failing to do our job. It's important to, third, identify the different forms of hate. And Sarah earlier made the connection of, well, she's on the front lines and she's dealing with hate crimes, and yet at the same time I'm dealing with legislation. Well, there is legislation circulating in Congress at this moment that definitely sends the same message, that this community is not to be trusted. And primarily, we're looking at superiority versus minority, the American being superior to the immigrant. And legislation such as the CLEAR Act, which authorizes local and state law enforcement to detain and deport individuals based off of civil immigration status, right? So if they have a problem with their immigration status, they can then be detained and deported as if they were a criminal. An attack on immigrants, which makes up a good portion of our community. We have the Patriot Act, against identifying a community that is not to be trusted. These people do not deserve the right to free speech and assembly. These people must be surveillanced, and they must be watched, and they cannot be trusted. And they should not until they prove themselves. It's been flipped. Now we're guilty before we're proven innocent. And we have legislation such as NSEERS, right, that authorized the INS, now under the Department of Homeland Security, to have something called call-in registration. Bring in immigrants from specific countries. It was originally all countries, then they limited it to, ironically, those countries that have Muslim majorities, to call in and register with the INS. And they had to do this on an annual basis. Yes, it was just overturned with the work of MPAC and a coalition of organizations, but now they're coming out with a different form of legislation that is based off of fingerprints and facial identification, no longer just names. But again, re-registering. We have to look critically at the legislation that faces us today. Even if we're not directly affected, if we're not feeling the impact ourselves, it will eventually spill over into our community. And it has. It has. And if we don't speak out, we're really not fulfilling our obligation in this country. This is our jihad, speaking out against injustice, inequality, and standing for what is right and forbidding what is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sireen. Thank you very much. I don't know if am I still on? Is this microphone on? That's okay. Ben.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It really is a great honor for me to be here today to speak to this organization. Sometimes unexpected gifts come from tragedies, and one unexpected gift that's come to me from our recent national tragedy is the close partnership between my organization, the ACLU, and this organization, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and my friendship, personal friendship with Salam al-Mariyati and Sarah and others whose wise leadership has made this organization a leading voice for civil rights and human rights, not only in our community, but in our country. So I want to start by thanking you and congratulating you. The theme of this panel is erosions to our democracy, and the good news, as Sarah said, is that the talk I'm going to give today is not the talk I would have given had this convention been held a week earlier, because just in this last week, our independent judiciary has spoken more eloquently and more powerfully about the themes that I wanted to discuss today than I could have. And so that is some good news. And I would like to frame my remarks today with a statement that is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. The story goes that at the close of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, Benjamin Franklin emerged from the room and a woman confronted him and said, "So, doctor, what is it going to be, a republic or a monarchy?" And Benjamin Franklin replied, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. If you can keep it." These are inspiring words, and they're also chilling words, because Benjamin Franklin knew what a gift the Constitution could be, but he also understood that the freedoms that it embodies will not be self-perpetuating. And in fact, it's been the case that in virtually every generation since the Constitutional Convention, Americans have been confronted with serious threats to our freedom, almost always in the form of the executive branch trying to claim authorities beyond what the Constitution provides it, and have had to overcome those threats and to recommit themselves to the Constitution and its promise. And so those who say, and you hear this all the time, that September 11th changed everything, tend to be the people who know the least about our history and have learned nothing from it. Anyone who doubts the meaning of Benjamin Franklin's statement probably is not familiar with recent comments of General Tommy Franks, one of the heroes of our recent adventure in Iraq. Tommy Franks, in an interview, speculated that the Constitution and our democracy would not be able to survive a terrorist attack using weapons of mass destruction. And here's what he said. He said, "The Western world, the free world, loses what it cherishes most, and that is freedom and liberty we've seen for a couple of hundred years in this grand experiment we call democracy. It means the potential of a weapon of mass destruction and a terrorist massive casualty-producing event somewhere in the Western world, it may be in the United States of America, that causes our population to question our own Constitution and to begin to militarize our country in order to avoid a repeat of another mass casualty-producing event, which in fact then begins to unravel the fabric of our Constitution." 2 steps. Very, very important. Ironic that he made these remarks to the magazine Cigar Aficionado. Smoking has probably killed a lot more people than terrorism worldwide, but that's neither here nor there. These were extreme comments, and no major political figure has come out and said that our democracy itself is fragile. But President Bush and Attorney General Ashcroft and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld all act as if the so-called war on terror, an extravagant and unfortunate metaphor of their own creation, justifies virtually any assertion of executive authority in the name of national security. And those who question these policies, those of us who work to keep the republic, are branded traitors. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar also with the comments that Mr. Ashcroft made in Congress not long after September 11th. And he said, "To those who pit Americans against immigrants, and citizens against non-citizens, to those who scare peace-loving people with phantoms of lost liberty, my message is this: your tactics only aid terrorists, for they erode our national unity and diminish our resolve. They give ammunition to America's enemies and pause to America's friends. They encourage people of goodwill to remain silent in the face of evil. I think we can agree with the Attorney General about one thing, and that is that we cannot remain silent in the face of evil, and we can't remain silent while our freedoms are stolen from us. We have not remained silent, we and you in this community, in the face of the Patriot Act, a misguided piece of legislation that was bullied through Congress, and I think will be repealed or amended with all of our hard work. And this week, the courts refused to remain silent in the face of what I think is a far greater threat to American democracy than the Patriot Act. And that is the president's claimed authority to seize, arrest, and detain an American citizen or an alien on U.S. soil, to hold him without charges, without access to counsel, and with no judicial forum, simply on the president's designation that the person is an unlawful combatant. Many of you, I think, are familiar with the case of Jose Padilla. Mr. Padilla is a former gang member who was arrested in the United States in Chicago's O'Hare Airport, accused, I say accused, not charged, accused of plotting a dirty bomb attack in the United States. But rather than bringing evidence against him, charging him, indicting him, the government turned him over to the military, stuck him in a brig, never brought charges against him, and just said, this is an unlawful combatant, we can hold him indefinitely, without ever giving him an opportunity to challenge his confinement. And this is really an extraordinary, extraordinary assertion of authority. Because the president is saying, not only can I alone call someone an unlawful combatant without any process or any standards, but once I do that, this person cannot go before a court, an independent judge, and say, it's not me, I didn't do it, this detention is unlawful, and can't even see a lawyer to raise those arguments. This really harkens back to the Star Chamber in Great Britain, to the real origin of the writ of habeas corpus in our Constitution, and it really is the hallmark of our Constitution that we have a balance of powers between different branches of government, and the executive cannot alone detain somebody without giving that person a forum to challenge it. And I think the decision this week from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York deserves to be quoted. That court did not say that people who are suspected of being involved in terrorist attacks cannot be held, but it said that the president alone can't do that. Here's what the court said. As this court sits only a short distance from where the World Trade Center once stood, we are as keenly aware as anyone of the threat al-Qaeda poses to our country and of the responsibilities the president and law enforcement officials bear for protecting this nation. But presidential authority does not exist in a vacuum, and this case involves not whether those responsibilities should be aggressively pursued, but whether the president is obligated in the circumstances presented here to share them with Congress. On the very same day that the Second Circuit ordered that Jose Padilla either must be released or charged with a crime, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in Los Angeles, in a very eloquent decision by, I'm proud to say, the judge for whom I worked for a year, ordered that the detainees who have been held in legal limbo in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for the last couple of years, also had a right to bring their cases before a court in this country because they have not been provided a forum to challenge their detention anywhere else. And I think that I'd like to read again at length from this court's decision, because I want you to know that we're not alone. We're not speaking to ourselves here. But the message that has resonated all weekend at this convention has found an ear, and that a very powerful branch of our government has given voice to that. And here's what the court said. The court said, under the government's theory, it is free to imprison indefinitely hundreds of citizens of foreign countries, friendly nations among them, and to do with its detainees as it will, when it pleases, without any compliance with any rule of law of any kind, without permitting them to consult counsel, without acknowledging any judicial forum in which its actions may be challenged. Indeed, during the oral argument in this case, the government advised the court that its position would be the same even if the claims were that it was engaging in acts of torture, or that it was summarily executing the detainees. To our knowledge, prior to the current detention of prisoners at Guantanamo, the United States government has never before asserted such a grave and startling proposition. Accordingly, we view Guantanamo as unique not only because the United States' territorial relationship with the base is without parallel, but also because it is the first time that the government has announced such an extraordinary set of principles, a position so extreme that it raises the gravest concerns under both American and international law. We recognize that the process due enemy combatant petitioners may vary with the circumstances and are fully aware of the unprecedented challenges that affect the United States' national security interests today. And we share the desire of all Americans to ensure that the executive enjoys the necessary power and flexibility to prevent future terrorist attacks. However, even in times of national emergency, indeed particularly in such times, it is the obligation of the judicial branch to ensure the preservation of our constitutional values and to prevent the executive branch from running roughshod over the rights of citizens and aliens alike. Here, we simply cannot accept the government's position that the executive branch possesses the unchecked authority to imprison indefinitely any person, foreign citizens included, on territory under the sole jurisdiction and control of the United States without permitting such prisoners recourse of any kind to any judicial forum or even access to counsel, regardless of the length or manner of their confinement. We hold that no lawful policy or precedent supports such a counterintuitive and undemocratic procedure, and that contrary to the government's contention, Supreme Court precedent neither requires nor authorizes it. In our view, the government's position is inconsistent with fundamental tenets of American jurisprudence and raises most serious concerns under international law. Which brings us back to Benjamin Franklin. How are we, as citizens, to keep the republic? And my answer is not by hoping for the best, but by fighting for it. Not by allowing those lapel pin patriots that you see on cable television to tell us what a true American is, but by showing our own patriotism, by defending the Constitution. In short, by keeping the America of Benjamin Franklin, not of Tommy Franks. And I would be remiss not only to my ideals, but to my organization if I didn't tell you that one good way to keep the Republic is to join the American Civil Liberties Union, which costs only $20 a year and brings so many benefits. And I'd like to ask my colleague, Dalia Hashad, who is here from the ACLU office in New York, to stand up. Dalia has ACLU brochures, and she'd be very happy to give them to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. And on behalf of MPAC, we'd also like to thank the ACLU for their amazing work since September 11th. And I don't think we would be where we are now without the ACLU. And please take Ben's advice and become a member. Lastly, we're going to turn to Reverend George Regas.
Okay. I'm really honored to participate again this year in MPAC's convention. I treasure the friendships that I have created, that I have been privileged to be part of over these last 20 years. So I'm glad to be here. Hate, the erosion to American democracy. I want to begin with September 11, 2002. The horror of the evil unleashed against America, the cataclysmic tragedy of those 3,000 deaths, all of that pain and agony are still very much with us. I recall very vividly a moment that Mary Regas and I, Rabbi Steve Jacobs and Linda Jacobs, along with 10,000 people, were part of the memorial service shortly after September 11 at Ground Zero. A memorial service for the families of those who had perished in that attack. It was the first time most of those people had been back to that place of horror. They had come to mourn the dead. The enormity of that evil unleashed against America lay before us. The grief that saturated the air is beyond description, as family after family held up pictures of their lost loved ones. I will remember that experience as long as God gives me a memory. That to me was the best of the American democracy as we came to cry for others. People who knew their destinies were inseparably linked together. The whole world in all of its diversity was crying with us, a wounded part of the human family. But there was something else that afternoon that disturbed me profoundly. The program for this memorial event was incredibly beautiful. That famous fireman that had an untrained but magnificent voice singing America the Beautiful. A rabbi read from a portion of the Jewish scriptures. A Muslim who served as the chaplain to the fire department read from the Quran. And the Reverend Franklin Graham, the evangelist Billy Graham's son, closed with the prayer. I don't remember what he prayed for, because the ending of the prayer stunned and embarrassed me as I stood there with my rabbi friend. Reverend Franklin Graham said, "All these prayers are offered in the name of Jesus Christ, the only one who can save us and cleanse us from our sins. In this Savior's name I pray." Reverend Franklin Graham and many others of the religious right believe that only Christ can save you Muslims. Not only is that arrogance stunning to non-Christians, but it is the seedbed out of which so much hatred comes this day. The best of democracy in America has a religious heart, but this divine spirit, this religious heart, is one that loves and accepts all people. For me, the sin and evil at the heart of the war against Iraq is the belief that an American life is more valued than Iraqi life. That an American baby is more beautiful and precious than an Iraqi baby. Therefore, a reaffirmation of our common humanity must be given primacy if there is ever to be peace. If there is to be an acknowledged religious spirit in American democracy, it is one that is inclusive and universal. Franklin Graham, in the Christian world, the religious right, they reject this inclusive world, and they take pride in those exclusive claims. They are, in my mind, the seedbed for the culture of war. Suspicion, fear, hatred of the other, the one not like me, is the fundamental disease of the world today. This disease of the heart is the source of every pogrom, every genocide, every ethnic cleansing, every Holocaust. I believe this disease of the heart, this hatred of the other in America, is the source of every racist episode, every urban riot, every gay bashing, every rape, every skinhead outbreak, every crime against Muslims. In this divided world, in this bleeding world that faces the possibilities of unimaginable destruction in the wars of the 21st century, we must hold to the sacredness of all life. All life is sacred. We urgently need to affirm that if we are to survive. Abraham Heschel has written, "The sense of the sacred, the sense of the sacredness of all life is the fragile thread upon which civilization hangs in our age." I have worked and prayed with Jews and Muslims and Christians over these last 2 years, especially as we've looked at Israel-Palestine. As we have struggled to find our heart and mind and voice, there has been intense controversy. But one element has emerged with clarity. What lies at the heart of so much conflict is this: the persistent failure to recognize the humanity of the other. Everyone is sacred to God and shares a common humanity. This affirmation is the only way into peace. So in my mind's eye, I see God's arms outstretched to all. In those divine arms of loving embrace are Saddam Hussein and George W. Bush, Ariel Sharon and Yasser Arafat, Fidel Castro and Dick Cheney, Reverend Franklin Graham and Maher Hathout. All sacred and precious. That's the heart of religion, and it is central to the democratic spirit of America.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have about 10 minutes for questions, and what's happened is that I have 4 very good questions, 1 question for each of you. So what I'm going to do in the interest of time is read all 4 questions, direct them to you. You can think about your response. I'm going to try to give you equal time to answer them. Isn't that amazing? Okay, I'll start with a question for Ben. Why 2 years after 9/11 has a critical mass of Americans not challenged the Patriot Act, the Clear Act, other measures that have been passed on behalf of the war on terrorism or because of the war on terrorism, including Guantanamo Bay prisoners, and how do we bring a kind of grassroots change? How do we educate Americans more to paying more attention to these human rights violations? Or you might disagree with that premise, but that's the question. A question for Sireen is, can you elaborate on the concept of humanizing ourselves in the eyes of non-Muslims? So comment further on how would you humanize? I mean, that's a tough one, to say the least. And then one for Dr. Bazai. You've linked modern and Islamic classical ideas over human rights, but overlooked the fiqh, traditions that do not allow equality between Muslims and non-Muslims or between women and men. Could you comment on that? And lastly, Reverend Regas, what measures, if any, are the progressive Christian communities taking to combat the damage done by the religious right within the greater Christian community? I'm sure all of you will be able to handle this in about 2 minutes each. Let's see.
Should I start?
Why don't you start, Ben? Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So the question is, why have the American people not been energized to fight for their own freedom and to oppose repressive and restrictive policies? And that is I find the answer to that. I'm not sure that I'd be here this morning. I mean, I'm not sure I would need to be here this morning. I think one reason why people are not more up in arms is that they've been presented time and again with false choices. And so the way that these restrictive policies are put to us is that we need this because it will make us safer, and we need to accept these sacrifices that of course don't fall equally in order to make everybody safer. And one way that the ACLU has tried to counter that, and we do think it's a false message, is with slogans. Our post-September 11th slogan is safe and free, meaning that we can be both. And I think that sometimes that's a little bit trite. I do think that there are times when there's a tension between liberty and security, and I also think that we need to accept the reality that even the most restrictive policies can't keep us safe from the most determined adversaries. But I do think that that is the way that policies are sold to us. And on the Patriot Act in particular, I think that there has been a remarkable groundswell around the country of people who are becoming educated about it and who are opposing it. More than 200 localities, including states, have passed resolutions calling for its more restrictive provisions to be repealed. Guantanamo Bay, it's a mystery to me why the American people have not been up in arms about it. I can assure you that if you go anywhere else in the world or if you read the foreign press, this is something that is very much on the minds of people around the world. And I think that the reason why the Supreme Court agreed that it had to resolve this issue is that these justices meet with justices of other countries, and the first question that they're asked every time is, what are you going to do about Guantanamo? This is a disgrace, it's a national scandal, and we all look to you for setting an example in freedom and liberty, and you are putting 600 people in cages without lawyers. And for that reason, I do think that the courts will give some justice, some access to justice to the people there. So a couple of answers. I think people need to do more. I think they're starting to, and I think organizations like mine need to take these issues to courts even if the people don't support it. Because the beauty of our Constitution is that there are rights that belong to people even if the vast majority of people would like to take them away.
I have a simple answer, and that is merely to follow the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His example in communicating Islam through action, in working with different communities, in carrying himself as a true Muslim, a believer, in being good to people irrespective of their background, irrespective of their beliefs, because that is what we are mandated to do by God. In becoming part of American society, because we are an integral part of that. And unless we accept that, if we continue to refuse to accept that, then we're really taking the easy route out. We have to become involved with everything from PTAs to city council to or joining organizations, whatever it may be, whatever your passion is, you must reach that level of activism and do your part in the community. Because if we're not, then we can't expect anything to get done. We have joined with, it's such a great feeling to work with the ACLU, but sometimes I just take a step back and think, God, like, where's the Muslim community? The ACLU has been doing so much on the front of civil liberties and even just breaking down the Patriot Act, yet it's really affecting our community extensively, more so than any other community. But where are we? Are we sitting in our living rooms yelling at the TV, or are we actually taking the responsibility and fulfilling our roles as we should be doing? And I want to leave you with a thought a quote of Martin Luther King. And he said, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. That is true peace. Until we internalize that concept, until we realize that justice is something that is a God-given right for all, and we strive for that, and we don't settle until we achieve that, then our jobs are not done.
Thank you. Dr. Bazai?
Thank you for the good question about the equality of men's and women's. This is a question that not only today was raised, actually in my TV shows on Meli TV, which I have, frequently refers to that as what's the position of women in Islam. And also, I wish the questioner or those who had this question in mind would have come to Iman. We had 2 months of women's right. As a matter of fact, I was one of the speakers there, and we talked about women's right profoundly from the Islamic perspective. First and foremost, I do not believe that when we are talking about the faqih or a jurisprudent in Islam, if he is truly based on his wisdom, that we say one of the principles of Islamic thoughts and ideology or methodology is aql, is reason. If persons based on his analysis on that reason, he's not going to violate that fundamental principle of aql, of reason. And it is not accepted to say it's reasonable that the women is different. In that, they are different, of course, is unequal in the sense of morality, even right, in sense of treatment and respect, in sense of honor and position, would be different from man. Let me express from the positions of Quran takes very clearly. And this is our first and fundamental principle. Again, as I said, the base, first base for us is Quran. The others are secondary and third. For me, as a Muslim, and of course analyst of the Islamic ideas, I look at Quranic verses first. Quran clearly does not state anywhere in any form or any shape, in any words or language, that there is any discrimination in that sense between man and woman. Let me make this clear. The idea of this anti-women position, in Farsi we call it zan setizi. For the lack of betterment of the terminology, I say anti-women position. This idea of zan setizi or anti-women position is not coming from Quran. It's coming from distorted versions of Torah and Injil, both. That of course has the Israeliyat according to jurisprudence. And I don't want to get into the background to that or historical text of that. Torah clearly, unfortunately, has sentences that comes from the creation and also the Old Testament in the terms of Genesis. From there jumps to some of the New Testaments as well. That position of Hawa is quite different from position of Adam in his creation. We don't have such a thing that Hawa was created from the left side of Adam by a bone and shaped it and formed it and then so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into that. This is not Quranic. All we see from Quran, فَأَزَلَّهُمَا الشَّيْطَانِ. Both of them, for example, in us, the creation, were, in other words, misled. And then the connection of zawj, which so many times referred to in Quran, وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا, the concept of being couplet and couples and equals, all the names of side by side, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى, we have created all of you from one source of male and female. All of this indicate this quality and equality between the two elements. There is no division here. There is no discrimination here. There is no priority and anything of that sort. It is difference. The concept of difference is different from inequality, is different from discrimination. Everyone has its own position in society, in culture, in family relations, and every one of those should work in the complementary pattern. There are many verses of that sort. I don't want to get into that. One sentence from Prophet Mohammad, which of course Sireen mentioned, why don't we start from him? He's a symbol of our guidance and light and enlightenment. What does he say? The best among you people is the one that best treated, they treat their women the best. خيركم منكم خيركم نساء. The best person among you is the one that treat their women the best. This could be said so clearly and can't be really better said. So in this relation, let's focus on this fact that when we are talking about women has the most fundamental and important equal rights like men. If any faqih says the different, as they have said, unfortunately, I put them in the category of that medieval mentality or the Dark Ages. Let's bring him in the modern Islamic and progressive thought. As I said in those meetings in Iman, we have to look upon Quran with a new understanding of what Quran says for our modern generations. Clearly, كَلِّمُ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عُقُولِهِمْ. We should think and analyze and understand our position based on our reasoning at the moment. الضروريات تبيح المحظورات. All the necessities of time change the necessities of time, change the orders of time, change the dictums of time, and now is different time for Islamic women. And Muslim women should stand for her own rights to say, I am first here equal to all men in the world. That's what it says.
Reverend Regas.
That's wonderful. For 30 years, a distorted religion, precisely the fundamentalism of the Christian right, has shaped policies in the public square. For 30 years, what the average person understood about being a Christian or a Muslim has been shaped by a distortion of those faiths. And so what is the progressive Christian world doing to counter all of that? Not enough. But if we are to create a life-giving religious spirit in this country, we have to be together. That's why I'm deeply committed to the interfaith struggle. I don't think that I can deal with all those distortions by myself. I mean, the Muslim understanding of a woman is not, and that distortion is not exclusive to you. I mean, the Christian faith has very many problems in how some people treat women and their place and their equality. So I think in the interfaith struggle, we will make progress. And in the interfaith struggle, I am not so much for words. I do think we need to understand each other. We need to know what the Muslim position is on women. We need to know what the Christian position is on war. But that still is secondary to what happens in the streets when we really go to work, when together we try to reveal the best in our faith traditions as we work for justice, as we work for civil liberties, as we work for a world that no longer has religions blessing war and violence. So if any progress is to be made, it is when Muslims and Christians and Jews and Buddhists and many other faith traditions join arms together and say, we, out of our own sense of the sacred, will create a new world. And I told Dr. Hathout, when he asked me to come here, that I had an appointment in Pasadena at 12 noon. And I don't know if I will have a wife when I get home. So Sarah, I'm going to have to go because I'm already in deep trouble.
The panel, and we thank you very, very, very much. This panel has really been positive. It's given us hope. It's given us analysis and tools. Please thank our panelists very, very much for being here today. And with that, I would like to close the convention for 2003. Thank you very much for coming to our third annual convention. The general portion of the convention is now over. Please give yourselves a big round of applause for being here for a day and a half. Chapter members of MPAC, you're not finished yet. We are now going to have a meeting for chapter members, and please stay here for the second half of the day. And I'd also like to announce the availability of a book that has been written by 2 members of MPAC. It's called The American Muslim Identity, Speaking for Ourselves. Please pick up that book in a booth right outside here. And again, thank you very, very much, and Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. The convention is officially closed. There's lunch available outside. There will be a membership meeting. Those who are members of MPAC and the members of USRA would join that meeting, but others are also welcome. Thank you very much. Let us recite Surah Al-Asr. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And then there will be prayers also outside. So inshallah after the Zuhr immediately we'll have the Usra meeting. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. May God bless all of us.